Okay, so good evening, everyone. We have a little bit of a hybrid situation here with students in the classroom and all of you here in the classroom and an audience online. Because this session tonight was a part of the exhibition Biophilic Region. So I want to welcome everyone either virtually or in person to our last digital lecture, or in this case, it's more of a panel discussion in the context of our Biophilic Region exhibition. This session is student moderated, so I will hand it over very shortly to 3 of our students. But before I do that, I want to quickly give an overview about the exhibition and the context of today's contribution to the exhibition. The Biophilic Region exhibition was up for the last 4 weeks, and it was actually dismantled yesterday. So if you are at school today, first time, you will probably not see the exhibition. But I just want to give a couple of summarizing thoughts, and I have to go to admit people in the waiting room from time to time. So the Biophilic Region exhibition was an effort to show, on the one hand side, the biophilic assets of Charlottesville as well as our county, and was also putting forward maybe a provocative statement or a statement that we want to realize very shortly, that cities and city boundaries are maybe not always the right administrative unit for biophilic elements, because a lot of these elements are running across political boundaries. And considering for example, the Meadow Creek area that sits in multiple boundaries is one of these examples that show this very sufficiently. It is also based on a longer discussion around why so far, or at least until 3 weeks ago, Charlottesville wasn't a member of the Biophilic Cities Network, but now finally submitted the application and was successfully welcomed to the network. So when we had our opening on the 19th of September, there was a little bit of a ceremony and a handover of the certificate, and the official ceremony in the city will take place next week. So Charlottesville by now joined the network, which is really amazing. And we also are in ongoing discussion with the county, and I'm a member of the Natural Heritage Committee, and we are spearheading this effort. And once both the county and the city admit it, I think then we can start the discussion around what a biophilic region is. But the exhibition stepped a little bit ahead of it and basically looked at the lens of 7 different assets and created a whole set of cartographies that showed why we are already a biophilic region. And for sure, the work would be how we are protecting that, because at the moment, at least, there's a lot of urbanization occurring, and how can we handle these efforts and learn from other cities in the network. So these are just a couple of images of the exhibition. I then expanded the work that was done in my urban strategies class last year, which was the asset analysis. I invited colleagues from across the school to work across multiple scales, from material research, tactical operations, work that is conducted in the planning department. And you are all here today to work to present some of this work that was in the exhibition last week. There was a little handout that shows the different aspects and components. On each of these terminals, we had a lot of movies and a lot of digital research that was presented in relationship to the work that we are seeing today. So when I opened the exhibition, I made sure that everyone looks at the multiple media that the exhibition was able to contain. Today, we have 3 excellent speakers, all from the planning department, who do really important and critical work in the context of biophilia. I will leave the introduction of you as speakers to our student moderators, but want to maybe quickly connect why or how your work is also so important to this year's assignment. We are working this year on the Meadow Creek watershed that had been extremely urbanized and disturbed. And we are working with multiple colleagues across the university. We received another grant to look at this specifically and how to not only look at green infrastructure implementation to repair the watershed, but to also look at the multiple parking lots on the commercial corridor side and how these areas could be activated in multiple ways through green infrastructure and solar production to basically allow for a repair, but also a kind of productive element in relationship to community scale solar plants in context to the commercial areas. So that's what we are working on this semester. As I mentioned, it isn't a part of a grant, and there will be another part next semester. Lawrence Band works with his students also on the simulation of the water flow. So this is a combination of multiple classes that are dedicated to this topic. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to one of our first student moderators who are going to introduce you all, and then we will start with Tim, and then Karen, and then. Well, you said I have to leave early.
How long? We're done at 8, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
for sure. Yeah. Okay, Emma, sorry. And introduce yourself, please.
Okay.
One more in the way.
Yeah, so that is, I don't, my apologies. I have to maybe stand next to you. So I can't activate the where. Ah, here. Okay. Multiple screens, not good. Okay.
Okay.
So
Okay. Hi, I'm Amber. Today we're going to be talking about biophilic cities, among other work being done in the sustainable planning field, with our guests Tim Beatley, Karen Firehawk, and Bev Wilson. A biophilic city is a transformative model of an urban environment where people and nature live in harmony. Historically, urbanization has not prioritized nature, leading to ecological vulnerabilities that are currently being exacerbated by climate change. Therefore, this framework for combining humans' innate affinity for nature with urban design provides an opportunity to not only enhance our living spaces, but also offer climate resiliency. Both Charlottesville and Albemarle County's climate resilience plans have made significant commitments to sustainable development thus far, aiming to reduce emissions and promote natural systems. Recently, as Mona mentioned, Charlottesville received its official Biophilic City certificate, and Albemarle County is exploring membership as well, which would create a distinguished biophilic region.
Hi, my name is Yaran, and biophilic design refers to incorporate nature into the built environment. Biophilic building blocks are the strategies that are used to achieve this goal. Biophilic building blocks consider both the spatial qualities of design and physical demands of the environment to develop site-specific strategies that emphasize the connection between the nature and the built. They can exist on a variety of scale, from the green roof at the building scale to a rain buffer at the county scale or larger.
In the Urban Strategies Seminar, we have been focused on the Meadow Creek watershed, which operates across the Charlottesville-Albemarle boundary. This is an area heavily impacted by big box commercial development and intense transportation systems such as US 29. We have been looking at opportunities for adaptation in this space using biophilic design principles through the lenses of energy production and consumption, water systems, urban fabric, land use, landscape, and infrastructure. The end goal for this analysis is to reimagine the watershed as a new biophilic building block, prioritizing access and integration of nature and natural elements, support for biodiversity, and sustainable urban practices. Now we will introduce speakers Tim Beatley, Karen Firehawk, and Bev Wilson, who will be presenting some of their work for us today.
Hi everyone. I'm very honored to introduce Professor Tim Bitley. He has been the Teresa Hines Professor of Sustainable Communities in the Department of Urban and Environmental Planning at the University of Virginia School of Architecture for more than 25 years. Much of Professor Bitley's work focuses on sustainable communities and the creative strategies through which cities and towns can fundamentally reduce their ecological footprints while becoming more livable and equitable places. He believes that the sustainable and resilient cities require our best hope for addressing today's environmental challenges. He is also the founder of the Biophilic Cities Network, which is an international group of cities that want to bring nature into city life. His leadership has sparked a worldwide movement towards biophilic urbanism, which changes how cities and nature would interact with each other. The Handbook of Biophilic City Planning and Design is one of his most important work. It gives both a psychological basis and practical advice on how to make nature a part of city life.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to be introducing Karen Firehawk, and I happen to have the pleasure of being one of the students in her Green Infrastructure Cities courses this semester. Professor Firehawk is an environmental planner who has spent over 35 years working on natural resource management, including green infrastructure, watersheds, and stormwater. She's been with UVA for over 25 years and is currently a lecturer in the Department of Urban and Environmental Planning. She has served as chair of the Charlottesville Planning Commission in the past and is currently chair of the Albemarle County Planning Commission. She has written many books and workbooks, including Strategic Green Infrastructure Planning, a multi-scale approach, which presents a 6-step process for green infrastructure planning to help inform land management decisions. Professor Firehawk is the co-founder and director of the Green Infrastructure Center, or the GIC. The GIC utilizes a variety of tools, including mapping, land use planning, and asset assessment, to evaluate green infrastructure for governments and communities. This analysis informs the generation of ideas for protection, conservation, and restoration of green infrastructure across a variety of scales. Some of her recent work includes resiliency planning for coastal communities across the Southeast United States, as well as addressing the impacts of climate change on disadvantaged populations and strategies of mitigation. She has also worked internationally via a UVA project in South Africa and with a U.S. State Department grant in the Middle East. Welcome, Karen, and thank you for bringing your knowledge and experience to our discussion panel tonight.
Okay, and lastly, very happy to introduce Bev Wilson. His research focuses on understanding urbanization processes, their cascading effects on surrounding suburbs and rural communities, and how these processes affect both the natural environment and the lives of residents. His research projects respond to an important need, namely to plan for sustainable communities under conditions of unprecedented climate instability and persistent inequality. Bev's work explores how data and technology play an increasing role in the way that we experience, understand, and plan cities, as well as how these resources can be used to inform policy and decision-making. Hailing from Warren County, North Carolina, Professor Wilson has a personal interest in the livability of small towns and rural communities, and he believes that planners can play a significant role in successfully meeting the many issues these areas face. Bev's research has been published in a variety of well-respected and impactful journals, including the Journal of the American Planning Association, Journal of Planning Education and Research, Landscape and Urban Planning, Housing Policy Debate, Journal of Environmental Planning and Management, and Journal of Urban Affairs. He maintains affiliations with the American Planning Association, Association of American Geographers, and Urban Affairs Association, 3 organizations that reflect and enrich his research. Thank you for joining us today. And now we will start with.
Okay. See, yeah. So we have a few people online, huh?
Yes, we have people. online.
Okay.
stop sharing, I think. Sorry. There we go.
I did a webinar yesterday where this is a tree fund webinar, and there were 1,000 people online. I've never been on a webinar that had that many people.
1,000 people.
I like that there are 8 or 10. That takes a little bit of the pressure off, I think, from so great, thank you. So we're at the end or the beginning, or I don't know where we are in this process, Mona, but you've done so much to push us along, and now the city is in the network, and that's really wonderful. Tell me how much time I have, though. You all. 20. Okay, can somebody give me like a 2-minute warning? Because I probably do have more slides than I can talk about. So I wasn't quite sure what to cover, but I've got a few sort of introductory slides about the Biophilic Cities Network. I'll tell you a little bit about some things that have been happening lately. And then I did know that you've been doing the Meadow Creek watershed. I know that was the focus of the work today. So I thought about pulling out a few examples of cities that are working around rivers in one way or another in some creative way. So you all know a little bit more, I think, about this maybe than you did before we started this project, the Biophilic region. The Biophilic Cities Network started about a decade ago. It is very much based around this idea of biophilia. This is one definition. I have to give a lot of credit to E.O. Wilson, Ed Wilson. He wasn't the first person to use the term, but he's really coined it in the way that we think of it today, that we're kind of carrying with us our ancient brains, that we've co-evolved with nature. That we need nature. Nature is not something optional. It's absolutely essential to leading a happy, healthy, meaningful life. And it can't just be something that we get once or twice on a holiday. It has to be all around us. It has to be things that we experience where we spend most of our time, which is in cities and homes and offices in those places. So I guess I have to go to this little arrow, don't I? If I can find the cursor. Where's the cursor?
Sorry, it's on Mac.
Yeah, I'm not a Mac person there. Perfect. I'll try to keep it there. And there's a huge amount of research, of course, and every week or month it seems we have a new study that reconfirms this. But I think a lot of us, this is very intuitive, that when we think about the things that give us a pleasure and delight in the world, the places where we feel calm and relaxed and happy. At least for me, they are things like this. They're things we call biophilic. They're trees and plants and butterflies and birds, really especially, but water, lots of things that we know now from the evidence. I can't just do that, can I? No, I got to do this. You're going to assist me in every. That's right. And we have a lot of research, and we know there's evidence that listening to bird song, for example, has a huge impact. We lowers our blood pressure, enhances our cognitive performance. We feel better in so many ways. We're more likely to be social. And some of the research is it's associational and correlational. It's not necessarily causal, but it is certainly mounting, and it's a lot of really creative work. This is a really interesting study from a couple of years ago now. We're doing a lot of work around trees and forests. We know intuitively that all these positive benefits that we get, mental health benefits from trees. This is a study from Belgium where they looked at the relationship between the size of trees and the size of the crowns of trees and sales of medications for mood disorders and cardiovascular disease. So those sales are lower in those parts of the city that have bigger trees. So trees are really important. If you have to summarize the research, it's really hard because there is so much of it. But everything on the right is associated with the presence of nature. So again, lower levels of anxiety, lower stress, improved mood, greater physical activity. We have a lot of evidence that the greener the neighborhood, the more trees, the more likely we are to be outside walking. And we know that physical exercise and walking in particular is associated with lots of positive health outcomes. lower crime, even some studies are showing evidence from environmental psychology that in the presence of nature, we're more likely to be generous. We're more likely to be cooperative. We're more likely to think longer term. I think there's a pretty good case to make that we are actually better human beings when we have nature around us. So I'm often using the word flourishing. It's a word that captures a lot of this for me, and we use this word a lot in our network. Not just the pleasure, the happiness, the benefits that we get from nature. It's the deeper connections, the sense of purpose and meaning, and that the word flourishing tends to evoke a deeper connection. There's a lot of evidence about why it is that we react to nature in this way, but there are a lot of things we still don't know. A lot of research about fractals, and of course, nature contains lots of fractals. That tree, or the leaf, is a small version of the bow, which is a small version of the larger tree. And there is a lot of speculation and some evidence that we have evolved a visual system over a long period of time to effortlessly process fractals. Actually, Richard Taylor, who chairs the physics department at the University of Oregon, is the one who's been writing the most about this, and he talks about it as fractal fluency. Not a big surprise that we like to look at clouds, we like to look at trees, and we like to look at sunsets and water and things like that that are high in fractals. So there's an emerging science there that underpins or buttresses a lot of the things that we advocate doing. We sometimes talk about this idea of the nature pyramid. I don't know if I've talked about this before. I have to give a lot of credit to our colleague Tanya Dank-Wachab, who sort of came up with this idea. We have fleshed it out and are using it in the network. Cities are using it in a very sort of diagnostic way. The notion that based on the old-fashioned food pyramid that used to guide our decisions, or meant to guide our decisions about what kinds of foods we eat, stuff at the top of that food pyramid are things that are healthy for us in small quantities, that we want to build that healthy diet with the things at the base of that pyramid, fruits and vegetables and grains. And similarly, we can think about a nature diet, and it helps us to think about whether there are minimum doses of nature that we need, and that's what we argue for. We've got to build our nature diet, if you will, by the things at the bottom of this nature pyramid, the things that we're going to see and experience all around us on a daily or hourly basis. That really intensive, faraway vacation trip at the top of that pyramid may be wonderful, but we can't afford the carbon footprint for everybody to build their diet, their nature diet around that. So, so this idea that there are different scales, and again, cities have been using this as a kind of diagnostic tool to sort of understand where in their cities these nature experiences are. I did actually show this to your class last year, that sort of a cool story that 2 springs ago, we were asked to help develop a national campaign in Belgium. This is sort of, there's a Belgian thing developing here, not intentionally, but the idea that they wanted to use the pyramid, but it turns out in Belgium they have this food pyramid as well, but it's not a pyramid. They flip it around. They flipped it upside down. So this is what they're used to saying. How's your Dutch? This is all in Dutch, but not so good. They produced a version of this in Dutch and a version in French. And so, what's the minimum daily amount of nature? Well, an hourly or a daily, weekly, monthly, and year. We tried to plumb the research and offer advice and guidance about what made sense at each of those levels. So we do want a city where, again, nature is all around us. So we started this network in 2013, and there are 34 cities now that are officially in the network. There's a process for joining, biophilic.org if you haven't looked there. Each city, once it joins, gets to curate its own page. So there's a page about each of our cities. Charlottesville, we're working on their page, right? It'll be up soon. We asked them, each city, to develop a series of metrics for how they will judge progress over time. There are celebratory events. There's me with the same certificate that the city got as a city council member in Raleigh, North Carolina, with a big celebratory event around Earth Day in Dorothea Dix Park down there. And I won't say too much more, but there is an ongoing discussion about what a biophilic city is. And obviously it will vary depending on where you are and the types of nature, the climate, the ecology varies from place to place, obviously around the world. So, and the political context will be different. So cities are embracing this idea and implementing it in a lot of different ways. But we do think a biophilic city is obviously a natureful city. It's a city that emphasizes connections to nature. We believe that cities have to rise to the occasion, that cities are an important part of the answer, the response to our global biodiversity crisis. So conservation can't be the whole answer, obviously, but coexistence and care for other forms of life. We believe that a biophilic city is a multi-species city, and that there's an ethical duty to make room for non-human species. I don't have the touch for the apple. So the vision, though, is one of, again, not far away nature, everyday nature all around us, and moving from a vision of cities where you see nature as being a park. It's in that park down the road, or that small grove of forest that you have to walk to seeing the city as a forest, which it often is, or seeing that city as an ecosystem, which it definitely is, and the idea of being immersed in nature. So Singapore is our best example of a city that sort of pushed this idea and to a great degree or extent. Singapore for many, many years called itself a garden city. It's a city and a city-state, of course. Few years ago, they shifted their motto to city and a garden, which seems like a small change, but really quite profound, that we're not just a garden city, but we are the garden. And more recently, in part in response to the experience of the pandemic, they are now calling themselves a city and nature, and sometimes a biophilic city and nature. But one of our first cities in the network, and actually doing a lot of policy and planning things to implement that idea. This is a Woha designed building called Park Royal, illustrating the Singapore landscape replacement policy, which is that when you build a new building in Singapore, you have to at least replace the nature lost at ground level with nature in the vertical design. And so in Singapore, that means green rooftops and skypoints, green walls and nature of that sort, which is where they've really been innovating. But if I had to summarize what the vision is about, it's immersive nature, integrated, continuous, and seamless. That green roof connects to that upper canopy, which connects to that ground level park. Continuous and seamless, built in natural environments together. It's parks, but it's beyond parks as well. It's certainly about biodiversity and wildness. It's whole of city, we say, so room or rooftop to region or bioregion and all those scales in between. It's whole of life, so you should be have that contact with nature from a very early age and have it all through your life, including into elderhood. It is about the presence or absence of nature, but it's also about a culture of biophilia. So there are lots of cities where there's lots of nature, but if you're disconnected from it, you don't care about it, you can't identify native species of flora and fauna, you're not engaged in caring for it, it's not truly a biophilic city. And then the last one is maybe uniquely American. We know that nature is not evenly distributed or fairly distributed, and all of our cities are trying to tackle that unjustness, and a result of redlining in American cities and longstanding racial discrimination, and so the idea of a just biophilia is a lot of what we talk about. So the cities, again, just a little sampling of cities who have officially joined the network prior to Charlottesville. Busan, South Korea, second largest city in Korea. So we're going from 4 million to whatever we are, 50,000. But some very interesting things that cities are doing. So many different ways that cities are implementing these ideas. Sometimes it's through codes and regulations. And this is an example, the Living Roofs ordinance in San Francisco. San Francisco has been one of our early partner cities, or Better Roofs ordinance, I should say, that's a mandatory either a green roof or a solar roof or a combination of the two, and that's increasingly what we're seeing, so-called biosolar, and evidence about the positive benefits of biosolar. I can circle back to that if you're interested. We're seeing in our cities a lot of incorporation of biophilia and biophilic principles into planning documents, which is really cool. Arlington County has probably done more than any other place. This is an example of Pentagon City sector plan that has a lot of language around biophilia and connections to nature, and key design feature here is what they're calling the green ribbon, which is this sort of thing, connected network of trees and nature, which is really cool. Wildness is a big part of this as well. We want wildness. And we talk a lot about rewilding or wilding in cities. This is Perth, actually Fremantle in Western Australia are our only Australian city so far. This is a wonderful story of the conversion of what was a fairly conventional, energy-intensive, chlorinated, biologically absent, or nothing, not very helpful in a biological sense, water feature in the middle of the city that's now been converted into a native biodiverse wetland. By the way, we have a lot of films on our Biophilic Cities page, and there's actually a short film about this really amazing story. A lot of our cities are pursuing a regenerative agenda, and we'd like to say Biophilic cities are regenerative cities. This is Wellington, New Zealand, a wonderful example of something called Zealandia, this wild space in the middle of the city where they've erected a predator-proof fence to help propagate or repropagate the native species of birds, and really wonderful story. Okay, Busan. It's a wonderful story of how the country as a whole, South Korea, has regenerated their forested mountains. About 70% of the country actually is in protected forested mountains, and they're really important places. And cities like Busan now are trying to bring those forests even further into the city. And one of the things we say about the network is that bringing cities together. How much time? 2 minutes. Now I'll go really, really fast. That we have the possibility of learning from a million wonderful ideas, things that cities are doing that we hadn't even thought of. And so with a lot of, not just Busan, but Seoul and other South Korean cities are pioneering this idea of planting patterns that intentionally move air into the city. So they're calling wind path forest. We know the shading and evapotranspiration benefits, the cooling benefits of trees and forests, but this is kind of a different way of thinking about it. So I have 1 minute left. So I have stories to tell you about cities that are making room for nature, like the 1.5 million free-tailed Mexican bats in Austin. Austin's a partner city. Edmonton, Canada, where they are emphasizing a lot of ecological connectivity in their planning and in their plans, the whole idea of coexistence, looking at the city through the perspective of a bird, using circuit theory to see how ecologically connected they are and identifying places where they need better connections. This city, more than any other that we know of, has invested in wildlife passages, now more than 35. Really wonderful story. I don't have time to tell you about this, but 2 weeks ago, we had the second iteration of St. Louis's effort to become what they're calling the nature city of the 21st century. And we had a big conference there 2 weeks ago. Wonderful things happening there. I got to follow this wildlife biologist around Forest Park. I have to tell you this because for you, three-toed box turtles, which is the species you have west of the Mississippi. And this is a radio tagged turtle that we followed. We went looking for. And so there'll be a 10-minute film or 15-minute film about this, and really wonderful program for monitoring not just turtles, but lots of different critters. Okay. I'm going to just skip over all of this and I can circle back. Oh, actually, here's the last bit of, I just wanted to throw out a few examples of river cities that are doing wonderful things. The Kalang River in Singapore is a wonderful story of how they've basically converted what was a hard surface engineered flood control channel into a beautiful meandering biodiverse river. Similarly, Vitoria-Gasteiz, capital of the Basque Country, also on our network, an example of daylighting a small river, wonderful impact in terms of biodiversity, but also placemaking, a wonderful place that people are attracted to. My last example is going back to Seoul, or going back to South Korea, the Cheonggyecheon River. We have a new issue of the Biophilic Cities Journal coming out in about a week. And there's a story about this, sort of reflecting on it. I had the chance to spend time here kind of understanding how it works. This is obviously a bigger city and may not be that relevant to Charlottesville, you may think. But it's a wonderful story of how they have took down an elevated highway and brought that river back to the surface. And we've been trying to sort of understand why it works so well. And there are a lot of elements to the story. It's the sound, it's the wayfinding, it's the trees, a lot of things that are really, really wonderful. This is actually my last slide, which was to say we have a short film about Meadow Creek that we will send you a link to it. I don't know if you remember Julia Tryman, PhD student from a few years ago. She made this film. Here's the vine, not the ribbon cutting, but the vine cutting. These are people that I know, Karen, you know quite well. But this is my neighborhood. We watched it unfold from moving from a very highly eroded stream to something where there are meanders, and it's really quite a remarkable story. But that film describes it quite well. That's it for me. Do take a look at biophilic-cities.org. Okay, I'm probably 5 minutes over. Okay.
Thank you. I will switch over to the slides. When you speak, Karen, I think as close as possible to that. Yeah, for the
Okay,
sound.
I'm very loud.
Um,
I have 3 brothers. You had to be very loud in my house.
that's good. Okay.
How do I advance the slides?
So I'm just.
I'll just
Yeah.
put it on the arrow.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's
gotcha.
not.
Okay, well, thanks for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. I came to UVA as a grad student and I simply refused to leave. So I'm just still got one leg. I just can't leave. Professor Beatley was a very inspiring professor to me in my younger days. Didn't have any gray hair then. But I sat right in the front row and took copious notes, and here we are today. So with that, I'm just going to jump in. I'm going to go kind of quickly, and for my students, you can take a nap during the familiar parts, and I won't judge. But I'm just going to get into, I'm an academic also, and I have to get into definitions because there's lots of different words bandied about. So what is green infrastructure? Well, the simplest way to understand it is on your left. You have the gray infrastructure of a city, the roads, the power lines, the sidewalks, all that built infrastructure that makes the city function. But what I'm trying to focus on is the green infrastructure. That's often forgotten or not used in mapping, but we have the trees, we have the wetlands, we have the rivers and creeks and lakes and bays and soils and all of that natural element. That's what makes the city live, just as you've heard from Professor Beatley. And one other fun fact, you gave us a lot of facts about trees, but one other fun fact is they make you nicer. You know, so if you're ever feeling really cranky, I feel like Congress should go outside maybe and see a tree. All right, so we've talked all about all of these benefits, so I won't dwell on these, but a lot of this type of work also makes economic sense. It's actually much less expensive to preserve a wetland or to preserve a forest to clean the air and soak up stormwater than it is to put tunnels under cities and build really expensive infrastructure. But public health, quality of life, access to nature, that's all very much part of this work. So another way I frame this for cities is green infrastructure are natural assets. And I use that term assets very intentionally. I've started seeing cities use it too. because they think about asset management. They have to manage their buildings. They have to manage the water treatment plant. They have all these assets on their books. They have a capital improvement plan. They manage these assets and they forget about nature. So we need to start bringing nature into that asset balance and thinking, where are our best agricultural soils? If we say we care about farming, have we mapped where those soils are? Do we know where is our groundwater being recharged so that we have enough water supply? So all of that is very important too. And then I also like that all these nature and natural assets support cultural assets. So I like to use this example of a winery in Fauquier County. I mean, we can understand Civil War trails and all of that, but I mean, there's plenty of wine in Washington, right? They don't have to drive out there to drink the wine. They do that because of that amazing view, that feeling of calm that everyone's getting. And they definitely need to get out of Washington more. So the term green infrastructure was actually created by a group studying greenways in Florida. It was created by a group who was trying to think of how can we explain to our governor as we create a greenway plan for the rivers that nature is important. And they started calling it green infrastructure. And this really resonated with the governor. And so that's actually where the term came from in their greenways report. And they actually had I think of it as like a treasure chest of cash to acquire land. And so they created a model to figure out what was the most important land in Florida. Where was the most important green infrastructure? Where were the big forests, the bays, the Everglades, river glass? I'm not saying they didn't know where the Everglades were, but there are certain pathways and parts of it. And how can we be strategic in what we protect? So later on, the definition of green infrastructure went past just being about natural assets. In 2006, EPA started calling all these best management practices like rain gardens, permeable pavement, Filtera boxes. These are things that filter and treat stormwater. And how I sort this out for folks is I call that constructed green infrastructure. And that's fine. These are all important, and I use these types of techniques in my practice. But I start first with the obvious things, the trees, infiltrative soils. I look at that first before I go to the engineering solution. So first, conservation. Conserve as much as you can, bring back as much of those natural features and functions. And then when you've got to treat something from a parking lot, you can put that Filtera box in. It's also very much about connectivity, right? So it's very much about that circuit diagram that Professor Beatley was speaking about. But we need these actual pathways for animals to survive and thrive. They can't just stay in a park. They need to be able to move so they can find new food, new mates, they can forage. All of this is so important. And so I often work with city parks to recreate that network and weave them together. And I'm sure you've heard of Olmsted and his emerald necklaces and all of that. This is not a new idea, but it's new for cities to actually go to the effort to kind of regreen, reconnect. And I'm not going to dwell too much on this because I don't have 3 hours to talk at you, but we do look in rural landscapes for large intact patches of habitat. And it's been studied in the eastern part of the United States. We're looking for 100 acres of intact forest because that's how much breeding birds need to survive and thrive, interior forest birds. Now, if I'm worrying about bighorn sheep out in Arizona, then I might be looking at 1,000 acres. So it all depends on the animals that you're trying to manage for, but 100 acres is a good minimum. So we did a map for Albemarle County. They couldn't figure out how to sort out what were the most important chunks of this habitat. And so we mapped and modeled this landscape and brought in all the different values about rare species, topographic diversity, all of these different scores and criteria that were used to rank these. And I'm pleased to say that the county is interested in updating this map. I met with them yesterday and they are very excited. So hopefully we will get a new and updated reprioritized map. But because we're very much focused on water in this class, I wanted to zoom in and talk about stormwater very quickly. So clean water is really an indicator and a barometer for what makes a city green. And we think about water as habitat, it's aesthetic, it's beautiful, but we also, cities think about it as stormwater. We have to manage stormwater. And I remember sitting in a Charlottesville City Council meeting, about 20 years ago, and them saying, streams are really great because we can take all the runoff from our streets and make it go away. And I was like, no, that's not what streams are for. Yes, they do help with drainage, but that's not their only function. But we also could think about water as water supply and drinking water. And we all know what a watershed is, but I wanted to just touch on that idea of how difficult it is to manage all of this water. So let's see if I can click. So we've got a lot of watersheds in Virginia. And what's really unique about where we are right now, I'm turning into Tim. Okay, there we go. This is the Ravenna drainage, right? The Ravenna drainage and Meadow Creek and Morris Creek and the little creeks are all part of that. But what makes it complicated, all these creeks flowing together in the Ravenna River and then flowing into the Chesapeake Bay, they're part of the James River watershed. That is a really big watershed. It goes all the way from the Highland and Bath County all the way down to the Chesapeake Bay. It's a third of the state's population living in there, and it's 45 localities and 7 planning districts. And so all of these groups would have to cooperate to an extreme level to clean the James River. We are sitting here in the middle James now, and we're caring about this for many reasons, but one of the reasons is the impairment of the Chesapeake Bay. And I find it really interesting. The red is the impaired section. That's down on the coast of Virginia, of course. And what's really weird, you see that green part where it's actually not impaired? That's because the ocean is mixing there, and that's diluting some of that. So that's why at the mouth, it actually comes out scoring clean. But nevertheless, there's a big movement to clean up the bay, and we are part of that watershed here. So urban ecology, healthy streams, just simple things to think about. Oops, if I could ever use this. All right, so having good tree canopy cover, stable banks, clear water, abundant and diverse native flora and fauna, and a lack of pollutants. And then some local photos here. That was a local photo too, but unhealthy urban creeks. Severely eroding banks, large debris flows. You can tell when a creek has too much stormwater coming down. You have these big chunks of debris coming down. Meadow Creek stream bank, somebody tried to stabilize that with some rock, but the force of the water is just too extreme. It just collapses and silts the bottom. And then that makes the creek widen because the bottom is shallower, and it's just a vicious cycle that occurs. And so you have to take a different approach to trying to stabilize that. Bioengineering, using native vegetation and weaving it into the bank, is a method, but that was a whole nother lecture. So let's keep going. All right, so as land cover changes, so does stormwater runoff, right? So, we can think about a natural watershed on the far left, and you can see that I've even made the water table a bit thicker, and I've just cartoonized it, research. So I have a cartoon illustrator who makes cartoons for me. And then at the very end, you can see as we get more and more impervious, look how the groundwater table has shrunk. That's because the water is running off instead of infiltrating. And so we have a real problem with this, especially on our coasts of Virginia, where the ground is sinking and the sea level's rising. So it's sort of a double whammy. So there's a lot of different kinds of pollutants in runoff, but more than half of the pollution we have in our streams just comes from runoff. And it's not so much from, somebody dumping something as it is just drips from your tailpipe of your car, pet waste, dirt blowing off a construction site. All of these different things add up to create problems for our streams. So much of the solution is in all these micro scales. And our modern responses to urban water management are not very attractive, bad for habitats, wildlife, and even us. So ugly. Now, some of you might like that dam in the middle, but it is blocking fish passage. So actually, students in my class wrote a grant proposal to partially breach the Ravenna River at the Woolen Mills, and that is breached today, and the fish go upstream now. So you can change these things, and you can recognize the history by leaving some of the remnant walls in place. But we have to think differently about stormwater. So now we know that there are better ways to deal with urban stormwater through especially some of these smaller scale techniques. There's a rain garden on the left. There's that Filtera box, like a rain garden in a storm drain. That's permeable pavement in the other side, draining to a little wetland, a little bioswale, sorry. And then that's the Paris Museum. So Professor Beatley, I too travel the world and study green infrastructure. It's a great excuse. My husband's really bored of me dragging him around stormwater facilities though. But he makes me go to Civil War sites, so I think it's fair. Anyway, so trees are the original and best green infrastructure. So before you begin with how many, Filterra boxes can I put in, if I leave you with nothing else, I want you to think about how to use the native trees that are on the site and bring in more trees. One mature tree can soak up almost 4,000 gallons of water per year. Multiply that times all the trees there are. Wow, somebody's having too much fun. All right, tree canopy and water. So there's just some more statistics, but you can start to really make a difference if you start thinking of trees on a city scale. So I want to pull you now into Charlottesville a little bit very quickly and just talk a little bit about Charlottesville and its focus on green infrastructure. My very first class in 2006, we adopted Charlottesville and created a plan for the city. And that's what made me lose my mind and start a nonprofit because we wanted to try to get to scale and help many more cities. But in urban areas, we can think about, we're not looking for 100-acre forest habitat patches. We're looking for even, I'll get excited on 5 acres, an acre, anything. Any little patch that I can get, and can I connect it? We're trying to drive development into Charlottesville and the urban ring around it and not develop in the county. And so this little chart down on the bottom right here is showing building permits in the rural area. Since Albemarle tightened its zoning and started directing growth to the urban ring, we saw a huge decline in development permits in the rural area. That's the blue line, and red is development in the urban area. So let's take a quick tour of Charlottesville. If you just look at it from an aerial, you can't necessarily make a lot of sense of what you're looking at. So let's just bring in the gray infrastructure. That's what a lot of city planners look at. But let's bring in that green layer. So this is the tree canopy and the water. So this is now that green infrastructure layer. And then we can bring in the open space that's already protected. So those are existing city parks. So now I know those are chunks of land. They can become nodes of protection. And then we can bring in the trail network. So we've got the Ravenna Trail going around the city, the wonderful network that was started by volunteers. And then we can start to play with the data and say, where are there chunks of intact habitat, where there's more than one tree, where there's several trees together? And I even had city council ask me this, Karen, what's better, 30 trees together or 30 trees all over the city? And I told them 30 trees together, because trees actually are creating a whole microenvironment and creating more infiltration and actually protecting each other. But I said, you could still also put groups of trees all over the city. All right, and then creating green threads. So what are those green threads? So I don't know if you saw that come in. We have a lot of streams downtown that are piped. And so it's really hard to use the creeks as our natural connector. And so we worked with the city on their priority scale, and they said, we have these streets that we kind of want to be green threads. So the idea is that those particular streets would be where they'd focus tree planting, or where they'd spend more money to expand a tree well to try to make it green. And then we played around with the canopy data some more. So looking at how green are all the streets in the city. So like the city started a walk to school program. Well, kids don't want to walk in hot places. People feel more protected when there's trees. They also calm traffic. So helping the city think about where are those greenest routes and where are they not green? Where is it too hot? Where do people not want to walk? And then stream buffers are a really important part of that. So thickening up that vegetative layer around the streams also helps to filter runoff. So we did an analysis of where the buffers were thick enough and where they could be thickened with extra tree planting. But one of the challenges in Charlottesville is most of the stormwater runs under that buffer through pipes and discharges directly to the streams. We have a disconnected system, and that's both good and bad for reasons I don't have time to go into. But all this water rushing through these storm drains, that's why you have those blown out banks there. So as you think about restoring the creek, think about the landscape and what's going on there. So we can redesign landscapes in the neighborhood scale to slow and filter runoff, so we can retrofit the landscape. Thinking, how can we make the city function like a forest? And I always make city councilors and people nervous when they see this. They think I want them to leave. I'm so biophilic nut, and I want them to get out. But I don't. I just want us to retrofit, to squeeze in nature where we can. Because if we don't do it, we have all these parking lots with no stormwater treatment. We get flooding. we get all that water rushing, and that's a local auto body shop. And that's where they store wrecked cars. So you can imagine there's some pollution there. So one of the strategies is to plant more trees. So we worked 2 minutes. So we worked with the city they said, we can only plant big trees. And we said, well, okay, you do you, but we can get volunteers to plant little trees. So we had all these little trees all over the city, and they had adoptive mommies and daddies. So this one says, this is my watering can, please don't steal it. So we got the city to plant a lot more trees by using, wait for it, people. Okay. And then we can look at a canopy by subcatchment to think about where we can add in trees depending on how untreated it is. And then do we have room for trees to grow? These trees are planted at the exact same time. However, in the trees on your right, they have underground structural cells to give the roots structure and support and volume. And also you can treat stormwater under there too. So that's what it looks like, that milk crate looking structure with suspended pavement that's permeable. All right, so I'm going to quickly click through. Lots of options. So we looked at where they could put more patches in the city. We mapped a location for every single tree that could go into the city, in backyards, sidewalks, everywhere. It's all summarized in the city green print that we did for the city. That's available online. That's sort of the city's roadmap for how they try to work on this. And they are installing little green practices. They keep working at it. I picked this one out because my students wrote the grant proposal to get the funding to install this. And now the city's off to the races, and they do this as a normal thing. Private developers like Richard Price's River Bluff is another one, a local developer who's green, who's been faculty here as well, working on making developments greener. There's an interactive map, so you can go online and see where all these things are and go visit them. Go frolic in the rain garden, get tactile. All right, so to sum up, how do we think about landscapes or sites? For new development, is it the right site to develop? I'm not going to give you a green award if you go out in the middle of the woods and clear it and then put in a house with some rain gardens. If it is the right site, how do your features on your site connect to other sites? I'm constantly asking developers what's next door, or let's move this over here because this connects to this. How can you minimize site impacts? Maybe you can have a smaller footprint. Go up instead of out. Let's have a parking maximum. Once you have the right site, you've maximized connections, protected the sensitive features, then you can talk about whether you should have permeable pavement, okay? But I want you to make sure that you don't have too much parking in the first place. And then if it's already been impacted, add wetlands back, reconnect the natural features, add habitat, add infiltration. If you don't have room, put the forest up on the rooftop. So ask how to avoid disturbing these resources. If you must disturb it, how can you minimize? And lastly, how can you mitigate harm caused? And that's the end. Thank you. You know how to use it.
The keys don't work.
Just
Okay,
click, oops.
okay. I'll adapt.
You will,
Adapt.
sorry. Oops, I can't adapt. Right, yes. Oh, actually it does work. Fine.
Okay.
So, perfect.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for having me. So I'm actually going to talk about one specific project that I've been involved with. As you can see, this is an interdisciplinary project. It's been funded by the UVA Environmental Institute. So this really long title here is something that can happen when you try to come up with a title by committee. But I think that the important things that I want to tease out here are we're really thinking about how to scale and cite nature-based solutions so that we can better leverage multiple ecosystem services. I'm going to tell you what I mean by those things very shortly. And so the beginning of this very long title is really sort of communicating something about the methods that are being used in this. So this project actually began back in April of 23. So now we're in the final phase of this work. And the truth is the progress has been a little bit slower than anticipated, but I'll come back to that. So what do I mean by nature-based solutions, or NBS? So the way that we're defining it for this project is as sustainable planning, design, environmental management, and engineering practices that weave natural features or processes into the built environment to promote adaptation and resilience. I don't need to tell you that climate change is one of the most urgent sort of issues of our time. But in addition to helping respond to some of the stresses of climate change, nature-based solutions are also or can be useful for advancing biodiversity and also provide useful benefits for people from a more humanistic perspective. A couple of issues that we're trying to address with this research, a lot of the nature-based solutions assessments and guidance that we were able to find focuses on a relatively small set of possible interventions. And there's not a whole lot known about about how to go about selecting the most effective interventions for different contexts. If you look around, there's been a lot of attention within planning in terms of urban greening. Sometimes those programs are implemented in a way that doesn't pay that much attention to site conditions, for example, in terms of compatibility. And then also focusing on just some of the technical aspects can sometimes lose sight of community needs, preferences, the likelihood of uptake, stewardship, and sort of feelings of ownership as well. So in terms of goals and approach for this research, so there's a couple research questions. So we're interested in better understanding how to broaden participation in decision-making around siting, scaling, and of nature-based solutions for flood and heat resilience, but also for water quality. And the other big research question here focuses on how to push beyond street trees. So street trees are one of the more popular, or have been one of the more popular interventions that has been used. So how do we push beyond that to consider some of these other interventions that are out there in response to local biophysical conditions, to regulatory constraints? One of the things that we're trying to more explicitly bring into the conversation are patterns of ownership and private property ownership, because we're working at a very different scale. And then also community preferences. So in terms of specifically what we're trying to do, we want to identify combinations of interventions that respond to articulated priorities, both in terms of institutional stakeholders, I'll talk more about that later, but also residents in areas that we are focusing on. And again, we asked some questions about air quality. One of the things that we've learned in the meantime is that air quality is really difficult to model. And the modeling piece is really important in terms of talking about, in a deliberative context, trade-offs between different combinations of nature-based solutions and the ecosystem services that are likely to emerge from those kinds of choices. And then again, understanding how this sort of array of factors converge to shape outcomes in a project like this, where we're trying to bring about positive outcomes that are specific to a particular place. So ecosystem services, I probably don't have to tell this group very much about this. So the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment from 2003 is really a watershed moment in terms of elevating the concept of ecosystem services, but then also launching this in a lot of ways in terms of a lens through which we can think about the way that people are interacting with the natural environment. In terms of this particular project, we're focusing primarily on what I would characterize, well, I think that we're more squarely in the regulating services, also to some extent within cultural services, and less so in the other two. But you can read the definition here. Basically, the direct and indirect benefits that healthy natural ecosystems provide to all of us, whether we're aware of them or not. Okay, so more specifically about the goals and the approach. So we're using scenario analysis as a framework for engaging with complexity, but also uncertainty. And so part of this work involves digital participatory mapping to better understand resident priorities and sort of experiences. Oh, I forgot that there's people online. Thank you. Those of you who had classes with me know that I like to wander. These old habits are hard to break, but I'll try to stay here for the benefit of our folks who are online. Okay, so we want to use a scenario approach, develop 3 to 5 plausible intervention scenarios that can then be used as inputs or starting points for the modeling work. So my colleagues in civil and environmental sciences are using stormwater management or stormwater modeling, or hydrologic modeling, but also a tool called iTree that you might have encountered in your travels for looking at impacts with respect to heat exposure in urban heat islands. So the scenarios are built on what we've heard from important institutional stakeholders and also responses from a resident survey that we've run. We're going to use those to do some modeling work so that we can say something about the likely implications of each of those scenarios in terms of cooling, in terms of reducing peak flow, in terms of stormwater and flood resilience, and then also water quality in terms of TMDLs, which is something that was alluded to in the previous presentation. Hopefully, we can get to the point where there's more of a deliberative engagement process as part of this. So many of you might be familiar with the geodesign framework from Steinitz and others, but that's the idea. Hopefully in the spring, we're going to have a focus group of sorts where we can talk through some of these findings and the implications of scenarios with a broader group of folks. So this is an overview of the project as we've articulated it. So IRB approval, we've already had many, many conversations with key informants. So staff from the city and the county, but also nonprofit organizations like the Rivanna Conservation Alliance. There's a household survey that I'll talk about more about in just a second that's designed to better understand resident priorities. We're also doing some suitability analysis to understand some of the biophysical constraints, and then developing the scenarios that are used to do the modeling work. And then hopefully in the spring, we can have this broader conversation to better understand preferences across the stakeholder group. So the study area, where are we working? So in the beginning, we thought that we might look at both Moores Creek and Meadow Creek upon further reflection. Meadow Creek is just more tractable, and it offers, I think, some more compelling comparisons. One of the things that we're really interested in is looking at more urban sites and having a variety, more of a contrast in the scenarios that we're able to look at. So if you look at these two watersheds, they differ in terms of their size. They differ in terms of vegetative cover versus impervious cover. And ultimately, we decided to move forward with Meadow Creek and specifically looking at these 4 sites. So as you can see, they're outlined here. And so number 1 is the 10th and Page neighborhood, which is in the city. Number 2, Fashion Square Mall area and the Branchlands area, which is part of the county. The Mitchell Drive subsidized housing, which is immediately to the west of the Greenbrier neighborhood. And then the Four Seasons and Townhomes and Townwood Mobile Home Park, which you can see up in number 4. And again, one of the things that we're trying to do is to make sure that we had a good mix of land uses, but also demographic groups who are living in these areas within Meadow Creek. And so in terms of the initial engagement phase, we conducted a household survey, and so we purchased a mailing list. There's vendors out there that have your information, and will sell that information to me. Oftentimes I can get not just your home address, but your email and your phone number. And so by purchasing these kinds of addresses, we were able to send postcards like these to a sample of households in those 4 areas, asking them to complete a questionnaire. You can read the details in terms of the responses. The response rate was not as high as we'd hoped, but we think that we're still able to learn some useful things. And you can see that the response rate was highest in the Four Seasons and Townwood area, and also the 10th and Page areas. So what did we learn in particular? So this is just a sampling of some of the questions that we asked. So this question, which of the following would you say is the greatest concern to your community? One of the takeaways is that most respondents were not very concerned about heat here in the Meadow Creek drainage. What else did we learn? In terms of benefits associated with nature-based solutions, which would you say is most important? Most respondents don't really see nature-based solutions as a way to address flooding and heat exposure, which I'm seeing some expressions that are perhaps it will lead to questions during the next segment. But one of the takeaways is that there's still some work to be done in terms of making connections here. And then in terms of barriers, what barriers would prevent you from implementing NBS on your property, if any? So as I said, street trees have been really popular in terms of urban greening initiatives, but I think that's in part because it helps to sidestep this tricky question of private property. How do you get landowners on board for implementing something like a rain garden on their property? But in addition to residents, we also had many conversations with institutional stakeholders, which are summarized here. So I mentioned the city and the county, a couple nonprofits that are active in the area, Soil and Water Conservation District. We even spoke to VDOT about this. And so on to the meat of the project. So citing and scaling nature-based solutions. So a big part of this has been suitability analysis using GIS data layers to better understand biophysical factors like land use and land cover, soil type, slope. But we're also really interested in this question of ownership type and how do you not just engage with residents, but perhaps convince some private property owners to not only participate, but help to steward some of these interventions. And so here we've listed just a couple of the data sources that we've used for this suitability analysis. So I should say that on the next slide, there's an article listed at the bottom that we drew inspiration from in terms of better understanding what some of these criteria might be for NBS of interest. I should also say that we also drew inspiration from and took guidance from the Virginia BMP Clearinghouse, which has a lot of information as well. Okay, so we're considering things like bioretention ponds. So this is just a list of the criteria that we used for that suitability analysis. And so part of the work was identifying GIS layers that correspond to these so that we could identify, for example, within the 10th and Page neighborhood, which grid cells are going to meet the criteria that we believe are going to be most important from a biophysical perspective for supporting something like a bioretention pond versus a green roof. So this one's a little tricky because the pitch of the roof is important for green roofs, and there's really not a data set out there that has that readily available. And so there's some manual inspection involved in that. Permeable pavement, which we have also heard about, is another one of the interventions that we're specifically interested in, and then rain gardens. I should also say, it's not listed here, but tree plantings is also something that we're looking at. So tree plantings, cluster tree plantings, as opposed to street trees or scattered trees is something that we're also able to model through the iTree approach. So in terms of next steps and where's the work right now, so this is an interdisciplinary project. We've been working on this since April 23. The truth is it's been slow going. We just recently have gotten some of the stormwater modeling results. We don't yet have the results from the iTree modeling, but those are forthcoming. So right now we're really finalizing the scenarios. So you have to set up sort of a basic model before you can try and represent specific scenarios. So that's sort of where we are. And so finishing that, and again, the end game is to evaluate using these modeling tools, what are the likely implications in terms of runoff reduction, in terms of water quality impacts, and in terms of changes in an indicator like land surface temperature, if we decide to pursue this mix of nature-based solutions that we're considering within each of those four study areas versus an alternate mix. And once the modeling work is done, we're going to have a focus group. We've already identified 27 people from the survey who have articulated an interest in being invited to a discussion like that. Obviously, our institutional stakeholders would be there as well. And so from a bigger picture perspective, we're interested in questions like these. How close together or far apart are residents and institutional stakeholders in terms of their priorities and how they're thinking about this kind of work? And then we also want to, as part of that discussion, think about the equity facets and dimensions of how and where those ecosystem services are accruing. Yeah. And this is sort of a longer term question. If and to what extent do these kinds of conversations and modeling work like this, taking modeling work and trying to bring it back into a larger deliberative space, how much does that influence the decision making? Because ultimately, a lot of the decision making lies with stakeholders like the city and the county in terms of how this unfolds and what path or what course of action is eventually chosen. So I don't have a nice implications slide, but just off the cuff, I'd say that this kind of work is slower and it's harder. There's a lot of moving parts, but I think that this question of how do you expand the circle of perspectives and priorities that are part of the decision-making process when we're talking about how and where to cite and scale these things at a more granular level is really important. And I'll let you all know how things work out between now and the end of next semester. And how am I doing on time? 2 minutes. All right. So I have time to, so part of the title was design strategies, in addition to modeling and scenario analysis. So there's space and there's funding. If there's anyone who would like to work on this project as an SRA, it's an hourly position. And that would be, I think, really helpful for me as we are getting closer to this end game of taking modeling results back to residents and to city and county staff as part of this sort of deliberation. So if anyone is interested in talking more about that or learning more about that, I'd be happy to talk with you offline. But that's my presentation.